The night was dark, and the Las Vegas Strip buzzed with the sounds of slot machines and the laughter of tourists. Inside the International Hotel, the show was about to begin. The stage lights dimmed, and the audience held its breath. Then the moody opening bars of "You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin'" filled the room. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, turned to face the crowd, but something was different. This time he was wearing a gorilla mask. The audience burst into laughter, but behind the mask, Elvis was struggling. His relationship with Priscilla was falling apart, and the mask was a desperate attempt to hide his pain. He had always been the king, the one who could make people smile and forget their troubles. But now he was the one with the problems, and no one knew it better than him. Elvis had always been different. As a boy, he was a dreamer who read comic books and imagined himself as the hero, fighting evil and saving the world. He idolized Captain Marvel and Superman, heroes who stood for justice and the American way of life. Even when he grew up and became a star, those childhood dreams never left him. He saw himself as a protector, someone who could make a difference. In the early 1970s, America was a different place. The country was gripped by cynicism, a result of the Vietnam War and the assassinations of leaders who had aimed to change the system. But Elvis didn't share this cynicism. He clung to a more innocent view of the world, a throwback to simpler times. He believed in the power of good and the importance of standing up for what was right. His admiration for law enforcement was well known. He would often visit police stations, donate money to their charities, and even join them on drug busts. When he wrote to President Nixon, he expressed his concerns about drug abuse and communist activity, offering to help in any way he could. He saw himself as a modern-day hero, someone who could make a difference in a world that seemed to be falling apart, but his world was falling apart too. In March 1971, Elvis went into the studio to record a new album. He was supposed to make a Christmas album, but the mood was summer. He gravitated towards lovesick ballads, songs that reflected the pain he was feeling. One night his right eye started to burn, and he had to be rushed to a hospital. The doctors were alarmed by the severity of his condition, and it took a lot of self-control for Elvis to stay still while they treated him. But even in pain, he remained the strong, disciplined man he had always tried to be. Priscilla was spending more and more time in Los Angeles, redecorating their new house. She had even started taking karate lessons, something that Elvis encouraged. But her new instructor, Mike Stone, became more than just a teacher. Priscilla and Stone began to grow closer, and their relationship became serious. Elvis, unaware of the affair, continued to juggle relationships with other women, seeking companionship and solace in his loneliness. The strain between Elvis and Priscilla was becoming impossible to ignore. On their 4th anniversary in Las Vegas, the tension was palpable. Later that year, Elvis recorded a gospel album, He Touched Me, which would earn him his 2nd Grammy. But the joy of the achievement was overshadowed by the growing distance between him and Priscilla. In October, Elvis went on tour, and his Beanie Badge and JCC Award became constant companion. He talked a lot about his mission to make people's dreams come true, but deep down he knew something was missing. When Barbara Lee, one of his closest friends, left him for Steve McQueen, Elvis began to speak more openly about the possibility of a split with Priscilla. He had always believed their relationship would last, but now he was starting to doubt. The final blow came on a cold night in December. Priscilla had returned to Graceland with their daughter, Lisa Marie, for the holidays. But as soon as she left for Los Angeles on New Year's Eve, Elvis knew it was over. He told his friends and associates that Priscilla would be leaving him. On his 37th birthday, he confided to Joyce Bova, "I'm past the age of Christ crucified. I can't wait much longer to plan the rest of my life's work." Priscilla came to Las Vegas for the opening of his next engagement, but she didn't stay. When she returned at the end of his month, they had a final, desperate encounter. In his suite, Elvis tried to rekindle their connection, but it was too late. Priscilla knew it was the end. She packed her things and left, and Elvis was left alone, his heart heavy with the weight of a dream that had finally come crashing down. Elvis knew he could have one-night stands whenever he wanted, but he was looking for something more. He asked his friends to help him find women. he could build a relationship with. One day, his friend George Klein thought of Linda Thompson, a former Miss Tennessee. Linda had shown interest in meeting Elvis. On their first meeting, she sat beside Elvis at the Memphian Theater, in the seat usually reserved for Priscilla. Elvis and Linda hit it off right away. Both were Southern Baptists, and they shared a love for reading the Bible together. Linda was also open to exploring different religions and enjoyed books like Only Love by De Amata and The Impersonal Life by Benner. She had a classic, well-proportioned face that Elvis found attractive. Despite his fame, Elvis cared about Linda's image and always booked a separate room for her when they traveled. Their relationship wasn't perfect. On their first phone call, Linda noticed Elvis's slurred speech and wondered if he had been drinking. Over time, she saw more signs of his drug use. He took pills constantly, sometimes needing medical attention multiple times a day. He even offered her pills, but she refused, understanding the risks involved. When the sedatives kicked in, Elvis sometimes fell asleep while chewing, and Linda had to stay alert to prevent him from choking. In 1972, Larry Geller, a friend of Elvis's, returned to his life after a 5-year break. Geller and Johnny Rivers went to see Elvis perform in Las Vegas, and Elvis invited them backstage. Elvis and Geller's friendship was rekindled, and Elvis showed Geller his collection of spiritual books, including Autobiography of a Yogi and works by Helena Blavatsky. Elvis was fascinated by Blavatsky, seeing a resemblance to his mother, Gladys, in her eyes and face. The Colonel, Elvis's manager, had long been interested in broadcasting Elvis's concerts on television. On January 14, 1973, Elvis performed Aloha from Hawaii, which was broadcast via satellite to over 40 countries. The concert was a massive success, but those close to Elvis noticed he looked tired and drawn. He had been on a strict diet to slim down for the performance, and his drug use had given him a sugar craving. After the show, Elvis collapsed on the sofa, sweating and slurring his words, marking the beginning of his decline. In February 1973, during a midnight show in Las Vegas, 4 men tried to attack Elvis on stage. Red West, Sonny West, and Jerry Schilling stopped them, but the incident left Elvis paranoid. He began to suspect that Mike Stone, a former friend, was behind the attack. One night, Elvis, high on medication, became obsessed with the idea that Mike Stone had to die. He even handed Sonny an M16 and asked him to carry out the deed. Linda Thompson, horrified, called a doctor, and Elvis was given a Valium to calm him down. The next day, Elvis still pushed the idea, but Red West managed to talk him out of it. Elvis's behavior grew increasingly erratic. In 1973, he canceled several shows, lashed out at people, and even passed out during a deposition. His performances were criticized, and he looked overweight and unhealthy. One night, he nearly killed a girl by giving her too much Hycotin. His relationship with the Colonel, who was also his manager, became strained. After a heated argument, Elvis fired the Colonel, but they eventually reconciled. Elvis's drug use continued to affect his life and career. His friends and family watched helplessly as he struggled with addiction and the pressures of fame. Despite the challenges, Elvis kept performing, but it was clear that he was not the same man he used to be. Elvis and Colonel Parker had a complicated relationship. Many wondered why Elvis, who had the power to fire the Colonel, always ended up following the Colonel's advice, even when it went against what he wanted. Peter Guralnick, in his book Careless Love, explains that for Elvis, Colonel Parker was more than just a manager. He was a symbol of luck and success. Elvis believed that the Colonel had brought him fame and fortune, and he feared that if he ever left the Colonel, his good fortune might disappear. This belief, combined with Elvis's interest in astrology and numerology, made him hesitant to make any drastic changes. Music was a sanctuary for Elvis. Throughout his life, gospel music had been a source of comfort and strength. After shows, he often invited his backup singers to his suite to sing songs that reminded him of his youth. These sessions were more than just entertainment. They were a way for Elvis to reconnect with his roots and find solace. To ensure he could always have this comfort, Elvis put a group of singers on retainer. They were free to live their lives, but whenever he called, they were expected to drop everything and come to sing with him. Elvis's spiritual journey continued. After reconnecting with Sri De Amata in 1969, he stayed in touch with her, even during her travels to India. When his personal and professional life became overwhelming, he visited her for advice. She reminded him that the goal of the Self-Realization Fellowship was to balance body, mind, and spirit. Although he appreciated her guidance, he found it hard to follow her advice about exercise and nutrition. This led to a deterioration in his health. In October 1973, Elvis and Priscilla finalized their divorce. Despite the legal proceedings, they held hands in court, showing the lingering affection they still had for each other. A few days later, Elvis experienced severe breathing problems and had to be rushed to the hospital. His condition was critical, and it was clear that his health had been severely impacted by drug use. Dr. Nick, his personal physician, worked tirelessly to stabilize him and treat his addiction. After a 2-week hospital stay, Elvis returned to Graceland, where he tried to follow a strict regimen to improve his health. However, his insomnia and depression made it difficult for him to stick to the plan. Boredom became a significant issue for Elvis. No matter where he toured or recorded, the routine felt the same. He talked about touring Europe and Australia, hoping for a change, but these plans never materialized. To cope with his frustration, he would shoot his pistols indoors, breaking chandeliers and television sets. His only consistent source of relief was karate. He trained rigorously and earned a 6th degree black belt from Ed Parker and a 7th degree from Kang Rhee in Taekwondo. Elvis decided to make a karate film to capitalize on the growing interest in martial arts. He envisioned it as an inspirational documentary, emphasizing the nobility and transformative power of karate. He wrote the narration and invested $125,000 in the project, despite Colonel Parker's disapproval. However, the film never came to fruition, and the project was eventually abandoned. Despite his struggles, Elvis remained generous. He helped his friend Jerry shilling buy a house by paying the balance himself in the middle of the night. This act of kindness followed a 10-day spree where he gave away cars, a boat, and a trailer to his friends and staff. His benevolence was a testament to his caring nature. Late one night in Palm Springs, Elvis confided in Larry Geller about a profound spiritual experience. He described a vision he had on Route 66, where he felt a deep connection to Jesus Christ. For years he had carried the burden of this experience, wondering if he was meant for a messianic role. He had struggled with these feelings, especially after his marriage to Priscilla and the demands of his career. Over time, he came to see himself as a man with a divine mission to bring happiness through his music. During his shows, fans would sometimes approach him with crowns or other symbols of royalty. Elvis always humbly rejected such adoration, reminding them that the only true king was Jesus Christ. He encouraged people to love his music, but to reserve their worship for God. Elvis's spiritual exploration led him to explore various religions and philosophies. He discussed the Book of Mormon with Donny Osmond's mother, and studied early Christian texts with Dr. Nick's Greek Orthodox pastor, Father Nicholas Viron. He also became fascinated with secret orders and their rituals, leading him to reprint a rare book on Masonic and Hermetic philosophy. Elvis's life was a complex blend of fame, struggle, and a deep spiritual quest. Despite the challenges, he remained committed to his music and his faith, always striving to find balance and meaning in his extraordinary life. Elvis's health issues forced him to postpone his first Las Vegas show in 1975. The Colonel rescheduled it for March, but on January 29th, Linda found him struggling to breathe. He was rushed to Baptist Memorial Hospital. When his friend George Klein visited, Elvis talked openly about dying, which was very unusual for him. While in the hospital, Elvis lost weight and tried to get healthier. However, his father, Vernon, had a heart attack and was placed in the room next to Elvis's. Vernon blamed Elvis for his heart attack and even said Elvis had done the same to his mother, Gladys. This made Elvis break down and cry. Despite his health issues, Elvis managed to return to Las Vegas, and the crowds were thrilled to see him back. He even joked about his weight, saying he looked better than he did a month ago. The highlight of his engagement came on March 28th when Barbra Streisand and visited his dressing room. She wanted Elvis to co-star in a remake of A Star is Born, a movie about an aging singer who helps a young star rise. Elvis was excited about this opportunity because he wanted to prove he could act well and redeem himself for the poor movies he made in the 1960s. However, when Elvis told Colonel Parker about the movie, the colonel raised objections. He wanted more money and better terms, which Strace and couldn't agree to. This made Elvis very upset, as he felt this was his chance to reinvent himself. When Strace and gave up and cast Chris Christopherson instead, Elvis was devastated. Elvis's health continued to decline. During his August 1975 Las Vegas engagement, he couldn't even stand for the first show. He had to use laxatives for colon blockages, which caused him to start the show late or leave the stage. After the third night, Dr. Nick convinced the colonel to cancel the run so Elvis could return to the hospital. In 1976, Elvis started the year in better shape and took 2 vacations to Vail. But when RCA and the colonel couldn't get Elvis to record in a studio, they set up a recording setup at Graceland. Even this proved challenging, as Elvis's interest waned quickly. He would invite people upstairs to show them his badge collection, or sing gospel songs to stay motivated. One day, Elvis craved peanut butter and jelly sandwiches from a Denver restaurant. He ordered 22 of them, and the cost, including flight expenses, was over $40,000. This showed how self-indulgent he had become. John Lennon once said that kings are often overdrugged, and overindulged, which keeps them tied to their throne. Elvis was no different. He was surrounded by people who enabled his self-destructive habits. Sonny West, one of Elvis's friends, noticed the large quantities of prescription drugs Elvis was taking, including Placidil, Collude, Valium, Percotin, and phenephrine with codeine. People around Elvis tried to help him. In Denver, a police surgeon refused to give Elvis a prescription for Dilaudid, a powerful painkiller. The surgeon talked to some of Elvis's friends on the police force, and they tried to persuade Elvis to seek help at a secret sanitarium. Elvis denied having a problem and left town immediately. John O'Grady, a private investigator, saw Elvis perform in Tahoe and was moved to tears by how bad Elvis looked. He tried to get Elvis to enroll in a drug treatment center, but Elvis refused. Dr. Nick once caught Elvis stealing over-the-counter medications during a dental appointment. When Dr. Nick took the bag away, Elvis was furious. Later, Elvis accidentally shot Dr. Nick with a small pistol, but Dr. Nick was only slightly hurt. In July 1976, Elvis fired Red, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, citing a fan incident from 2 years earlier. This troubled Elvis, but he didn't realize the long-term damage this would cause. Jerry Schilling had already left earlier that year, and when he saw Elvis at a concert, he noticed how much Elvis had changed. Elvis's performances in 1976 were increasingly poor. He forgot lyrics, stopped singing mid-song, and resorted to using an oxygen tank backstage. In Houston, the audience left early, and a reviewer called the show a depressingly incoherent, amateurish mess. Colonel Parker warned Elvis that if he didn't get better, his career would be over. Despite all this, Elvis insisted he was fine, but those around him knew he was struggling. In the fall of 1976, Elvis Presley was hit hard by news that his close friends Red, Sonny, and Dave were planning to write a book about him. At first, he couldn't believe they would do something so disloyal, especially Red and Sonny, who he trusted deeply. His initial shock turned to anger and then depression. From their perspective, the 3 friends needed the money and hoped that by telling Elvis's story, they could help him confront his problems and save him from himself. On November 19th, Elvis's luck seemed to change. His friend George Klein introduced him to Terry Alden, Miss Tennessee, along with her sisters, Ginger and Rosemary. Elvis immediately felt a strong connection with Ginger. He described it as love at first sight, saying, "When I saw her, the sparks flew. Nothing had ever hit me so strongly." That first night, Elvis was a perfect gentleman, even though he took her to his bedroom. They spent the evening talking and looking at his books. The next day, he called her and invited her back, suggesting they go up to Memphis in the air. When she said she wanted to call her mother, he suggested they call from Las Vegas. To his surprise, her mother was fine with the idea, and only asked Ginger to be back the next day. Elvis felt a deep connection with Ginger, saying she reminded him of his mother, especially her eyes. He tried to shape her into the ideal woman, much like he had with Priscilla. He introduced her to his spiritual studies, and even had his friend Larry Geller help explain the importance of the books. Ginger shared his love for the book The Prophet, and they enjoyed reading it together. However, like Priscilla, she didn't share many of Elvis's other interests. Ginger was very close to her family and didn't like being away from them. When Elvis had to go to Nashville for a recording session in January 1977, she declined to go with him. This led to a fight, and Elvis became demanding. Despite her excuses, he decided to go alone but was so upset that instead of going to the studio, he checked into a hotel and brooded. He told the studio he had a sore throat, and the musicians who were waiting for him had to kill time. After 3 days, Elvis decided to leave without even stopping by the studio. Elvis's friends couldn't understand his fascination with Ginger. She didn't share his interests and often left Graceland in the early hours of the morning. Worried, Elvis had her followed, but it turned out she was just going home. Despite her shortcomings, Elvis remained infatuated with her and proposed to her on January 26, 1977. To strengthen their relationship, Elvis planned a 2-week trip to Hawaii for just the two of them. However, the trip quickly expanded to include Ginger's sisters and a few friends, turning into a group of almost 30 people. The vacation ended up costing him $100,000. 10 days into the trip, Elvis got sand in his eye, which swelled and burned. When he heard that his father was having chest pains, he decided to cut the trip short and fly back to Memphis. Elvis had a surprising revelation about his heritage. He confided in his friend Larry Geller that he had Jewish blood through his mother Gladys's maternal grandmother. This knowledge pleased him because he believed the Bible said the Jews had a special bond with God. He even considered studying Hebrew to read the biblical texts in their original language. One night while on tour, Elvis woke up and wandered the halls. His chief of security, Dick Grob, found him looking for Billy Smith's room. Elvis woke up Billy and his wife Jo to talk about a powerful dream he had. He saw the face of God, which appeared as a bright white form. They talked for over an hour before Elvis fell asleep in their bed. In June, Elvis showed a glimpse of his old self. He noticed 2 young men harassing an attendant at a gas station. He told his driver to stop, jumped out, and struck a karate pose, challenging the assailants to fight him instead. They were so surprised to see Elvis Presley that the situation was quickly diffused. He even posed for pictures with them before leaving. Elvis was increasingly worried about the book his friends were writing. He feared how his fans would react and how it would affect his family and friends. He often talked to Billy Smith about it, expressing his fears and insecurities. He had a recurring dream where he found himself penniless, on stage in front of empty seats, and abandoned by Colonel Parker. Ginger often refused to go on tours with Elvis, saying she missed her family. To solve this, he sometimes flew her entire family to his shows. After a show in Binghamton, New York, he couldn't stand her constant complaints anymore. He demanded that she choose between him and her family. She walked out, breaking his heart. Even though he was hurt, Elvis couldn't give up on Ginger. His daughter, Lisa Marie, was coming to visit for 2 weeks in August. They decided to have Ginger's niece stay with Lisa as a companion. They planned an outing to Libertyland, a local amusement park. On the day of the visit, Elvis wasn't feeling well and wanted to cancel. Ginger insisted they go ahead, saying the girls would be disappointed. Elvis, not wanting to lose face, had the park reopened for the night. It was a special moment for his daughter. Elvis was booked for a 12-day tour starting in Portland, Maine, on August 17th. He tried to stay on a liquid protein diet and exercise to prepare. Ginger continued to frustrate him, not wanting to go on the tour. On August 15th, a typical day at Graceland, Elvis woke up at 4 p.m., he cleaned up 8 and called Billy at 7. They watched TV, and then he called Ginger to come with him to a dental appointment. After the appointment, they returned to Graceland. Elvis talked with his team about the tour, and his daughters returned to California. He haggled with Ginger about the tour and discussed marriage. He called Dr. Nick around 2 a.m., complaining of pain from the dental work. Dr. Nick wrote a prescription, and Ricky Stanley was sent to pick it up. Larry Geller, who was staying nearby, brought a stack of books for Elvis, including one about the Shroud of Turin. Elvis was eager to read them, and had Al Strada pick them up. Around 4 a.m., Elvis called Billy and Ginger to play racquetball. They played for a while, and Elvis played some songs on the piano, ending with Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. Elvis, Ginger, and Billy went upstairs. Elvis kissed Lisa Marie good night and washed his hair with Billy's help. He wanted a sedative to help him sleep and called Dr. Nick's office, but no one was there. A nurse on the property, Tish Henley, arranged for the medicine, and Elvis's Aunt Delta brought it upstairs with ice water. Over the next few hours, Elvis received 3 packets of medication from Dr. Nick, given to him by Ricky Stanley and his Aunt Delta. Elvis wasn't sleepy yet, but Ginger was. He took the book about the Shroud of Turin into the bathroom to read without disturbing her. It was almost 9 o'clock in the morning. A little after 1 in the afternoon, the maids heard a thump upstairs. Ginger woke up between 1:30 and 2 o'clock, spoke with her mother, and went to check on Elvis. He was lying face down on the red shag carpet, a few steps from the toilet. Near him was the book, a scientific search for the face of Jesus. Elvis's death was a shock to everyone. Laboratory analysis later confirmed that the primary cause was polypharmacy, too many powerful medications in his system. 14 different drugs were found, with 10 of them in significant amounts, and as many as 5 at toxic levels. Despite his passing, Elvis's legacy lived on. His music remained popular, and fan clubs around the world kept his spirit alive. For years, many people refused to accept that he was gone, spotting him in various places around the country. Some were pranksters, but many genuinely believed they had seen him. Odd things happened after Elvis died. That night, everyone at Graceland gathered to watch the 10 o'clock news. Suddenly, the TV lost its sound. 2 days later, while people were carrying Elvis's coffin to the hearse, a branch from a nearby oak tree broke off and landed on Ginger Alden's car. When George Klein played a cassette of Elvis's hits, the tape broke right after Can't Help Falling in Love, the song he used to close his shows. When Alan Fortas tried to play Blue Hawaii in his car, the tape jammed. Linda Thompson said that when she heard the news in Los Angeles, the power in her apartment went out. These were strange things, but not too out of the ordinary. However, some really extraordinary things happened, and not just to those close to Elvis. Dr. Raymond Amudi, Jr. wrote about these incidents in his book, Elvis Afterlife. On the afternoon of August 16th, a farmer named Claude Buchanan was taking care of an injured cow on a slope behind his house. Elvis had once given him money to buy a pickup truck he couldn't afford. As Claude worked, he saw Elvis walking up the slope toward him. Elvis was surrounded by a blue mist, and Claude found it odd that he hadn't noticed him earlier. Elvis got about 10 feet away and said, "I've come to say goodbye for a while, Claude." As Claude turned to see his wife calling him from the house, Elvis disappeared. That same day, a couple named Arthur and Marion arrived home to find their windows closed and the front door locked. Inside, a statue of Elvis had fallen off the coffee table, and 2 pictures of him had fallen off the wall, breaking the glass. They had no children or pets, and nothing else was disturbed. When they turned on the TV to catch the news, they learned about Elvis's death. That evening, Ruth Ann Bennett and a friend decided to listen to Elvis's records to mourn him. When Ruth went to get the records, half of them were warped and warm to the touch. They had never been played recently. A few months later, a trucker picked up a hitchhiker in Arkansas who was polite and called him sir. Near the end of the ride, the hitchhiker turned and said he was Elvis Presley. The trucker was shocked and dropped him off near Graceland. A woman named Janice had a jacket Elvis gave her. After his death, she kept finding it on the floor of her closet. One day, she saw the right sleeve moving up and down, which scared her. She rented a room to another woman, and her dog often barked at the closet and avoided going near it. One of the most remarkable stories involved a police officer named Harold and his son Tony. Tony had run away to Los Angeles after an argument. Harold had a dream where Elvis came to his office, showed him a badge, and pointed to a map of Los Angeles. Elvis told Harold where to find Tony, and warned him that Tony was on drugs. Harold and his other son went to Los Angeles, and found Tony exactly where Elvis had shown him in the dream. Tony later told his father that he had dreams about Elvis, who said he would help him. Elvis's fans loved him not just as a singer, but as a spiritual figure. He had a magnetic quality that made people feel special. When he was younger, he participated in a blood drive in Germany, and fans wanted to buy his blood to inject it into their veins. Elvis's music director, Joe Guercio, said that Elvis had the ability to grab people's attention and make them feel something. Elvis was generous and kind. He gave away a $20,000 diamond ring during a concert, paid for a record producer's kidney transplant, and helped a friend who was in a coma. He also bought a special car for an old army buddy with cerebral palsy, and hired the man's father to work at Graceland. Every Christmas, he donated between $50,000 and $100,000 to Memphis charities. Despite his fame, Elvis remained curious about spiritual matters. He read books, meditated, and prayed, believing that he had a mission to uplift others. His fans saw him as a king, but Elvis saw himself as a seeker, always looking for deeper meaning. Even in his last moments, he was reading a book about the spirit. Elvis Presley's life was a whirlwind of fame, success, and personal struggles. After his return from the Army in 1960, he was eager to get back into the spotlight. On March 5th, he officially returned to civilian life, and the world was ready to welcome him back. Just 2 months later, on May 12th, he appeared on the Frank Sinatra Timex Special, a television show that marked his return to the small screen after a long absence. His performance was met with overwhelming enthusiasm, and it was clear that the king of rock and roll was still at the top of his game. In July, Elvis released the album Elvis Is Back, which featured a mix of rock and roll, pop, and ballads. The album was a commercial success and included the hit single, It's Now or Never. This song would go on to become one of his best-selling records, selling over 20 million copies. The song's heartfelt lyrics and Elvis's powerful vocals resonated with fans around the world, and it quickly climbed to the top of the charts. November saw the release of His Hand in Mine, Elvis's first gospel album. The album showcased his deep connection to his faith and included some of his most soulful performances. It was a departure from his rock and roll roots, but was well received by both his longtime fans and those who appreciated his spiritual side. Also in November, Elvis's first film after his military service, G.I. Blues, hit the theaters. The movie was a light-hearted romantic comedy that featured Elvis in a role that played to his strengths as a performer. The film was a commercial success, and it helped to solidify his status as a multi-talented artist who could excel in both music and acting. Throughout 1961, Elvis continued to balance his music and film careers. On March 26th, he performed a benefit concert in Honolulu, Hawaii, to raise funds for a memorial to the sailors who died on the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor. The concert was a huge success, and it demonstrated Elvis's commitment to giving back to his community. Just 2 days later, he began filming Blue Hawaii, which would go on to become one of his most popular movies. In 1962, Elvis released 3 more films: Follow That Dream in April, Kid Galahad in August, and Girls, Girls, Girls in November. These movies cemented his status as a leading man in Hollywood and expanded his fan base even further. Each film allowed him to showcase different aspects of his personality, from the charming and romantic to the adventurous and daring. The following year, 1963, saw the release of It Happened at the World's Fair in April and Fun in Acapulco in November. These films continued to be successful, and Elvis's popularity showed no signs of waning. His performances on screen were always energetic and engaging, and his music remained a constant source of joy for his fans. By 1964, Elvis was at the height of his fame. During the filming of Viva Las Vegas, he carried on an off-screen romance with his co-star, Anne Margaret. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and the film became a classic of the era. When Viva Las Vegas was released in May, it was a box office hit, and the soundtrack, featuring the title song, became a chart-topping success. In 1965, Elvis experienced a spiritual epiphany while driving from Memphis to Hollywood. This moment of reflection and introspection led him to release Crying in the Chapel, a song he had recorded back in 1960. The single reached number 3 on the Billboard 100 and resonated with listeners who appreciated its emotional depth and sincerity. Later that year, on August 27th, Elvis had a historic meeting with the Beatles at his Bel Air mansion. The two musical icons, along with their bands, spent the evening together, and it was the only time they ever met. Elvis's life continued to be eventful in the years that followed. He released more films, albums, and singles, and his influence on popular culture remained strong. However, the personal challenges he faced, including his marriage to Priscilla and the birth of their daughter, Lisa Marie, added new dimensions to his life. Despite the ups and downs, Elvis Presley remained a cultural icon, and his legacy continues to inspire and captivate people around the world. Elvis Presley's story is one of incredible highs and heartbreaking lows. From his humble beginnings in Tupelo, Mississippi, to becoming the king of rock and roll, Elvis left an indelible mark on the world. His life was a roller coaster of fame, love, and personal struggles. Elvis's early life was shaped by his close relationship with his mother, Gladys, and his deep faith. His music, a blend of country, blues, and gospel, resonated with people across the globe. His moves on stage were revolutionary, and his charismatic presence made him a superstar. But fame came with a price. The pressure, the constant attention, and the isolation took a toll on him. Elvis's personal life was as complex as his public persona. He married Priscilla in 1967, and they had a daughter, Lisa Marie. Despite their love, the pressures of fame and Elvis's growing dependence on prescription drugs strained their relationship. They divorced in 1973, but their bond remained strong. Throughout his career, Elvis surrounded himself with a tight-knit group of friends and confidants, known as the Memphis Mafia. They were his support system, but they also witnessed the changes in him over the years. Sonny West, George Klein, and Dr. George Nishapoulos were among those who stayed by his side, even as his health declined. Elvis's final years were marked by a series of concerts and a deep spiritual quest. He was searching for meaning and purpose, reading books on religion and philosophy, and exploring different spiritual paths. His performances were still electrifying, but his health was deteriorating. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found dead in his Graceland mansion. He was only 42 years old. Elvis's death shocked the world, and his fans were devastated. His legacy, however, lives on. Graceland remains a pilgrimage site for fans, and his music continues to inspire new generations. The king of rock and roll may be gone, but his spirit and influence are eternal. Elvis's story is a reminder of the complexities of fame and the importance of authenticity. He was a man who lived life to the fullest, despite the challenges he faced. His music, his passion, and his impact on popular culture ensure that he will always be remembered as a legend.